friends, Laurelei Black here from Blade Broom, and this week we are going to be talking about the portion of a witchcraft ritual that is called within Wicca cakes and ale or cakes and wine, and within Tradcraft it's usually called the hoozle or the red meal. So this is common within all within almost all, I can't think of any witchcraft tradition in which I have not heard of this practice. So it's common throughout witchcraft, it's common throughout a lot of paganism, it's neo-paganism, and there are examples of this type of shared communal meal within a lot of Reconstructionist polytheism as well. And as we get to talking today, you're going to see that this type of shared sacrificial or Eucharistic meal has very ancient roots. And we're not going to spend a lot of time talking about those shared ancient roots, but I would like to ground it in a little bit of history before we talk about the symbolism and then get into a demonstration. Two demonstrations, actually. So let's talk about a little bit of that history and symbol together today. So there are several religions throughout the world, and especially religions that sort of have their grounding within Middle Eastern or Mediterranean context, that get their roots from that part of the world anciently, and also secular magical traditions as well. So those magical traditions that are not necessarily religious in nature also have this shared imbibing and consumption of consecrated bread and wine, or some kind of liquid that has been blessed with the properties of the ritual, or with the properties of whatever force is empowering the magic of the work. This meal is usually seen as either or both a sacrifice or a Eucharistic celebration. Now that word Eucharist, it comes from the Greek. It is a word that means thanksgiving, basically, to be grateful. And so if you break it down into its parts, the eu or eu, that EU part of the word means well or good. And then eucharistic means to offer graciously. And so that initial word, eucharistos, basically meant thanksgiving. So it's like a little thanksgiving in every ritual that you do. And so you're asking for blessing and making a sacrifice within every meal. So the focus of this meal can be very different depending on the aims of the ritual and also on sort of the traditions practicing it. And so some are very focused on that blessing aspect and that thanksgiving aspect, where others are more focused on the idea of the sacrifice that's required in order to fuel the working, and the idea that in order to be given something, you also have to take, and in order to take, you also have to give back. And so we're going to see that again in the demonstration that I'll do later. In both cases, what we see is that the meal is blessed, that both parts of the meal are blessed, that the bread is blessed and the wine is blessed, and that the sacrifice is blessed, and that it's consumed. It's important that those participating consume the feast. And in many, many cases, it's an acknowledgement of both. It's a celebration of life, and it's an acknowledgement of the need for death. So it holds balance within it, even if the particular tradition isn't always really playing up one aspect, it's still there. It's still part of the mystery of the entire act. So I feel like for a lot of people that come to the craft, many of us either come from very non-religious households, so we don't have a lot of sort of comparative religion experience, or we come from traumatic Christian backgrounds is sort of a mild way to put it. But we do have the perspective of those Christian upbringings, and so we might have had some communion experience of some kind. So we have seen that Eucharist or that communion with some kind of wafer and juice or wine within the church upbringing that we might have had there. So when we do experience cakes and wine or cakes and ale and the hoozle or the hoozle, we don't always recognize the similarities that really do exist, aside from those at the surface level, you know, that they're both the shared meal and that they have similar components. We don't necessarily always embrace some of the mysteries that are actually at the heart of both rituals, because we're so enamored with our new religious or magical experience that we don't always sort of dive into what those mysteries are and how deeply impactful they can be. The other thing is that we don't always know how many other religions and magical practices have this as a central ritual. And that I think that it's really cool that this as a ritual can also stand alone. It is, again, usually at the end of a lot of our rituals that we do as sort of a final piece or a capstone to the ritual, as a way to, again, give thanks or to give back to those spirits and beings that aid us. But it is also just a ritual that you can do at any time as a way to give thanks and give energy and give sustenance whenever you want. So a few other places that we see similar practices in other religions I'd like to just offer with you are the Passover Seder in Jewish traditions, the Deipnon in Hellenic polytheism or Greek polytheism, and that one is practiced at the new moon or the dark moon every month, and it's basically a picnic that you would have outside, a meal that you would have outside at night under the dark moon. There are a great number of libations and offerings that are made within many polytheistic religions around the world. So within Greek and, I mean, really, to list them, Greek, Roman, Norse, Celtic, like the African diaspora, like honestly, to name them individually is a task unto itself, because so many offer food and drink to their ancestors, to the spirits, to the heroes, to the land spirits, to you name it, and they're making offerings of food and drink in the recognition that this is a bond that we share and that we operate together and that death happens as a result of life, and life isn't possible without death, and that the seen and the unseen are woven together, and that these two things are interdependent, not independent. So, and that's sort of a central tenet, I think, of this ritual, is that everything's connected, and so there's that balance and that give and take. So in terms of some of the symbolism that you see within the cakes and ale or cakes and wine ceremony in Wicca, or the husel or red meal that you see within Tradcraft, there's always, again, some kind of bread and some kind of drink. And it usually is bread. It's not usually a meat or a fruit or something like that. It's usually something grainy. And it's this idea that bread or grains can often be grown and then cut down and still grow. And so you have this cycle of life that happens that's embodied within that agricultural cycle that probably deserves time and attention and delving into that mystery all on its own, and the gods of the grain that are represented therein. And then you have wine or ale that's fermented very often, unless there are reasons that a coven or a group does not want to use that or can't use that, whether that's because a member is abstaining, or there's some other objection to it within the group, or because you're in a public space like a public park and you're not allowed. So, or because you've got underage members and there are objections on a legal basis of that nature. So, but again, there are mystical and magical reasons about the alchemy of alcohol that are embedded within the choice of that fermented drink. So, and there are lots of really interesting articles and essays and things that have been written about why wine, why ale, why mead, and that type of thing. So I would encourage you to do some thought on that and to sit with that and think about those symbolisms, because there is much insight to be gained by that. Even if it's not a beverage that you would consume necessarily. The deities that are embodied within those drinks are often mirth bringers and joy bringers, and so within those beverages we have ideas of joy and regeneration, because again we have dying and resurrecting deities often being again embodied by wine and ale and mead, John Barleycorn, Dionysus, and many others. So we have a bread that represents sustenance and the bodily life, and we have wine that represents joy and the spiritual life. One of the things that I have found interesting, and this is a broad generalization, so don't come at me, but is that we often find within Wiccan traditions, you see cakes and wine often being of a light colored nature, so light crescent shaped cakes like this, to represent the moon and the full moon, and then light wines often, not always, again for the full moon, and it's using that sympathetic magic and that type of thing. Although if you were doing a different kind of work, you could absolutely use different kinds of wines and different kinds of cakes. And then within Tradcraft you often see, it's embedded in the name, sometimes it's called the red meal, so you see dark breads and red wine being used, because there is this understanding that it is more sacrificial, and so you have this idea of it being a bloody sacrifice, and that wine representing the blood and the bread representing the body itself and the bloodied body in some ways. So, although I will say, of the Wiccan and Tradcraft rituals that I've attended, I have seen such a wide variety of all kinds of cakes and all kinds of ales, wines, meads, milk, juice, you name it. I have seen every kind of you know, Oreos and Little Debbie's and homemade bread, homemade cake, like anything that could be used for cakes and ale, I have seen. So there is nothing that says that you can't use what appeals to you for the sacrificial or Eucharistic meal, because you certainly can. The choices are limitless, and as long as you understand what and why you are using the thing that you are using, all is well, as far as I'm concerned. And there's no cakes and ale police to come after you if you're using something sort of non-traditional. So one last note, and I think I've kind of covered it in some ways, but I just really want to drive the point home. Often within many traditions of Wicca and Neo-Wicca and witchcraft, contemporary forms of witchcraft in general, you see cakes and ale, cakes and wine being more of that celebration of life and a Eucharistic celebration, that Thanksgiving. It has a very sort of great rite in symbol, meaning a sort of feel, meaning that it's celebrating aspects of fertility and those blessing aspects of life. And where there is the hint of sacrifice, it's a little bit more embedded on the down low within the ritual. Whereas in traditional craft, the sacrifice aspects are really played up, and the death that is needed in order to sustain life is more accentuated. And so that celebration and that Thanksgiving is almost always noted and stated, but concepts of sex and fertility are not as present within those more sacrificial hoozles, I guess is a good way to put it. So let's get to the demos. So first off, I got to apologize because they're doing road work outside my house, and we're just going to hear that. Strictly speaking, in a Wiccan ceremony, you're going to see both a priest and a priestess doing the blessings. But since it's just me, I'm adapting it, which is also a common thing for a lot of folks to have to do if they're doing ceremony on their own. So this would be one variation on how you could adapt it for yourself. As the athame is to the male, so the cup is to the female, and conjoined they bring happiness. O Queen most secret, bless this food unto our bodies, bestowing health, wealth, and joy, strength, peace, and that fulfillment of love which is perpetual happiness. So mote it be. To Hoozle now we walk the wheel, we kill tonight the blood-red meal, a leftward tread of magic's mill, to feed the gods and work our will. Red, red is the wine we drink, red, red are the cords we wear. Red, red is the blood of God, and red is the shade of the Hoozle. For our ancestors, our gods, and ourselves, we do this. Here is bread, flesh of the earth, blessed to give us life and strength. I consecrate it in the name of the old ones. With my left hand, I take its life. Here is wine, blood of the earth, blessed to give us joy and abundance. I consecrate it in the name of the old ones. I take its life and give it to them. By the red and black and white, light and darkness, dark and light. What we take, we freely give. We all must die, we all must live. Above, below, and here are one, all together, all and none. Here is shown a mystery. As we will, so mote it be. So the hoozle that I just showed you is the hoozle as my tradition performs it, and everybody does it just a little bit differently because you do it sort of as it was handed down to you or as you developed it. So this was basically the way that my partner and I developed it at the time that we founded our tradition, and it was pretty influenced by the way Robin Artisan wrote about it as a fellow walker along the crooked path. But with pretty heavy influences of our own inspiration from the materials. So I hope that you find inspiration from what I have shared with you today, and that you have a better understanding of this really significant ritual of the cakes and ale or cakes and wine, of the red meal of the hoozle. However it is that you have practiced it, it is a deeply embedded piece of the craft. And so I would love to hear what insights you have had. So drop those comments below and like, subscribe, share, do all those things. Check out my various links in my link tree if you're interested in seeing what other things I get up to, because there's a lot. I got things in my Etsy shop that you might be interested in, Book of Shadows pages and whatnot. So check it out. I'll see you guys back here next Monday at noon. And that's all. Bye, guys.